Okay, hi everyone. I'm Mr. Sherman Lee, and today I will be bringing all of us through a demand and supply question. This is a rather interesting demand and supply question mixed with a little bit of equity. So, today I'll go through just the essay planning for both part A and part B so you can have an idea of what you need to write, especially in the essay, okay? So, before I even read the preamble, right, I look at the part A and part B question first. The part A asks me, right, why can a shortage of fuel still exist in Sri Lanka despite a rise in the price of fuel, right? So here they're telling me that even though there's a rise, there is still a shortage of fuel. Okay, so I will delve into that a deeper bit later. And then for part B, they said that discuss whether price control is the most effective government policy to maintain affordability of fuel in Sri Lanka. So this is the key, right? Whatever policy we come up with, the focus has to be on maintaining affordability. So straight away, I know this is a policy question. I know that I'll write my policy 1, policy 2, right? So when I look at the preamble now, right, Sri Lanka has faced the worst economic crisis ever, and there has been huge concerns over the affordability of fuel. The lack of foreign reserves to import resources has worsened the shortage situation. So to begin with, the start point is that here what they're telling you is that there is already a shortage to begin with, but then the lack of foreign reserves worsened the shortage, and the government in response has used price controls to counter fuel costs, right? So when I delve into part A, this is not really a clear-cut key argument 1, key argument 2 sort of essay, because it's more of like there's a very nice flow, a very nice structure to it. So I would write it in terms of body paragraphs instead. So you see, right, when I look at my body paragraph 1, to begin with, I know that I need to explain the demand and supply side of things, right? I need to explain the shortage portion. Before, I have to explain why there's a shortage, and then why there's a shortage after there's a rise in price. So there are two parts that we have to tackle here. So when I look at my body paragraph 1, right, I'll talk about the worsened shortage. So you can see from here, and then for body paragraph 2, I would talk about the price elasticity, right? And then body paragraph 3, I will bring in the idea of price controls. Why? Because we need to realize that when there's a rise in price, but yet there's still a shortage, right? Usually it is because either PD, PES, or both are very inelastic. This is because when they are both price inelastic, right, both demand and supply are price inelastic, you will likely need a large rise in price to be able to deal with the shortage issue. And the idea here is that if there's still a shortage after a rise in price, it is likely that the rise in price is not large enough, and hence we can kind of work backwards and understand that we will likely need to use elasticities. For body paragraph 3, why I choose price controls, right, is because in the preamble itself, they already told me that the government has responded with price controls. So this is not something that I'm taking out of maybe contextual knowledge. This is something that I'm taking directly from the preamble. Okay, so I'll delve straight into it. I would draw the graph first, okay? So knowing that I want to draw PED, price control, and worsened shortage, right? If you look at my graph over here, I'll draw it a bit bigger. You can see that straight away, let me just draw the graph. Initially at my original, let's say here, right, let's say this is how the market is at first. I have S0 and D0 for demand and supply. Initially there's already a shortage, which means that it cannot be producing at here. So I'll just put an arbitrary point below the equilibrium price, maybe here, and I'll call this my P0, right? And I can see here that this is my initial shortage. And here, I would say that look, the shortage here is QD minus QS units, right? And then because of the inability to import resources, it actually has worsened the shortage. So you see, right, actually my supply curve shifts up. My supply curve falls, right? there's a fall in supply, and you can see very clearly here that it has actually worsened the shortage situation from here. So this is the worsened shortage. And these 2 points will be my QS prime and QD prime. So you see now the shortage has increased from QD minus QS units to QD prime minus QS prime units, right? So now I get into this, right? For my body paragraph 1, I would just describe that in the preamble they already told me that there's an existing shortage. And then I would reference to my graph existing shortage of QD minus QS units as shown in the graph. And then after that, I would explain that because in the preamble they told me there's a lack of foreign reserves to import, right? So you see that there's a lack of foreign reserves. So this affects the ability of the country to import resources such as fuel. So lack of foreign resources lead to a lack of ability to import resources, right? And then because of this, my supply falls from S0 to S1. So you can see here I'm trying to engage my graph as much as possible. And then after that, I would say that this would worsen the shortage at the initial price of P0 to QD prime minus QS prime units. So now you see here I'm already using the extract, I'm using my diagram to explain everything. So this is generally how I would explain my worsened shortage. And then you must say that if there's it left to the free market, right? If in free market, left to the free market, technically shortages should clear in the free market. So I would explain my price mag. And most importantly, when I explain my price mag, I need to explain that when there's a shortage, prices would increase, and as prices increase, quantity demanded decreases and quantity supplied increases until new equilibrium, right? Where's the new equilibrium form? When QD until quantity demanded equals quantity supplied again. And theoretically speaking, this should be at this point, correct? Where S1 meets D0. Again at S1 equals to D0. So here I explain what should happen, right? So I already explained the worsening of the shortage and I explained what should happen. But now I'll delve into the second part of the question, right? Which is why there's still a shortage despite the rise in price of fuel. So here, when I look at my BP2, right, you realize that it doesn't talk much about the elasticity of the supply, right? The price elasticity of the supply. So I'll focus, when I want to focus here, right, between choosing PED or PES or both, I would focus on PED only. And why would I use PED, right? Because you realize that fuel is required for many things. So this one's a little bit of contextual knowledge, right? It's required for many things. So it's required to power a lot of things, right? Maybe cars and everything. So used to power many things. And realistically speaking, in maybe countries like Sri Lanka, where maybe they're not so ahead of the green movement, the conversion to alternative forms of energy, they are likely still very, very reliant. So Sri Lanka likely still very reliant on fuel, right, to power many, many of the things in their country. So because of this, you realize that the demand is very, very price inelastic, right? So it's very, very price inelastic due to fuel having basically no available substitutes in Sri Lanka at this point in time, right? So I'll say that PED is very, very inelastic. And because of this, when the price mag happens, right, the price mag should lead to a rise in price. But since PED is very, very inelastic, can you see? When PED is very inelastic, right, it means that a large rise in price is required, is an increase. Large rise in price required to clear the shortage. But because there is a very, very, very price inelastic demand, you realize that the changes in price, right? You realize when there's a rise in price, there has to be a fall in quantity demanded and a rise in quantity supplied. But because the demand is so unresponsive to a change in price, right? It may not be responding fast enough at this point. The changes in price may not be responding fast enough at this point to clear the shortage. So I say may not be responding quickly enough to clear the shortage. So this is the outline of the second body paragraph. And then when I look at my third body paragraph here, right, I'll write it here so that's all around the same area. I'll talk about my price ceiling. Why I want to use price ceiling? It's not that I can always use price ceiling when they talk about a shortage still existing after rise in price. But because they already said in the preamble that the government has already responded with price controls. So this is a measure that the Sri Lankan government is already taking up. They said it in the preamble, so I can use it. So when I draw Pmax, right, I will actually modify my diagram a bit. So you can see here, right, that by right, right, the price and quantity should go under here. So I'll write maybe here is Q1 and then here is P1. By right, it should go under here. But maybe because of the Pmax that is set by the government, let's say it's set between here, basically any point between P0 and P1 works lah. So when I write Pmax over here, you realize that because of this price ceiling, right, I would explain that I would define what a price ceiling is. Pmax definition. I would define that a price ceiling is the maximum permissible price that producers are able to charge. Permissible price that producers can be able to charge as legislated by the government, right? So because of this maximum price, despite the upward pressure in price, you realize that prices can only increase until P equals to Pmax. And you realize that at P equals to Pmax, because it is still below the equilibrium level, right, there is a final shortage of, let's see, at Pmax, you see that your QD is still greater than your QS, right? So I will look at your here, this, actually I'll just draw on a diagram lah. QD prime prime, QS prime prime. You see that there's still a shortage of QD prime prime minus QS prime prime units for the very simple reason that the Pmax is below the equilibrium price that the market would have equilibrated to, and therefore it cannot clear the shortage, right? So I would say that there is still a shortage of QD prime prime minus QS prime prime units. So very clearly I'm answering all parts of the question. The graph is a little bit complicated, but if you work through it step by step, right, you realize that this graph makes a lot of sense. So if you look at this diagram, I'll give you about 10 seconds to copy down everything, to take down everything. I'll screenshot it. But this is generally how the structure of the essay would go. Now, I look at question 2, right? Discuss whether or not price control is the most effective government policy to maintain the affordability of fuel in Sri Lanka. So this is generally a simple question. My focus here will be on the evaluation. So for my part B, right off the bat, I know it's a policy question. I have just policy 1, policy 2, right, as my key arguments. So key argument 1 will be Pmax. So then I'll just explain how Pmax works. And then I'll draw a diagram for it, right? So the diagram, if I were you, I wouldn't reuse this diagram that I drew on top because it is very, very complicated. So I'll just draw a new Pmax diagram to illustrate how it works at the side. And then the most important thing when it comes to policy questions, remember we have our OWL framework, right? After the workings of the policy, we need to talk about the limitations of the policy, right? And here, okay, I'll just draw a very simple a very simple Pmax diagram. I won't label the okay lah, I'll label the axis, but then you all have to spell it out in long form in the actual exam, by the way. So let's just say there's a fall in supply, right? And then this P1, this P0. Okay, so here, right, when there's a Pmax put here, let's say this point over here, for example, just to simplify the diagram, my focus, right, when I want to talk about Pmax, my limitation, I'll always talk about the presence of a black market. And then here, I would say at this price Pmax, right, you realize that the maximum price consumers are willing to pay is at here, P black market, right? So I'll say because of the presence of black market, or the possibility of a black market emerging due to the shortage, right? Because there's still a shortage after the Pmax is added, prices could go up to P equals to P black market, which is much higher than even the equilibrium price of P1, correct? And you have to realize that if this black market, so here, right, when we write this limitation, we even have an angle of evaluation. If black market issue is very bad, you realize it actually go against the idea of a Pmax in the first place, because it actually would make prices even more unaffordable. It could make fuel even more unaffordable. And here, if you have the contextual knowledge, right, you can bring in the idea that, you see, Sri Lanka, their governance, maybe because the country is big, maybe the government is not as active in curbing such things. So the presence of black market is likely, right? And hence maybe a Pmax would not be sustainable in the long run, because it could actually worsen the affordability of fuel issue. Okay? And then I look at key argument 2. My key argument 2, right? Here, when you realize that when there's a shortage and a rise in price, there are two things you can do. You can either decrease demand or increase supply. So this is your choice. So I'll go through one by one, okay? So for the decrease in demand argument, right, the focus of the decrease in demand, if I draw the graph over here, the focus on a decrease in demand is, let's say, I won't draw the change in supply just for simplicity's sake, right? I'll just draw a fall in demand. So when there's a fall in demand, you realize that my prices would fall due to my price max. So obviously the price max and everything you need to explain, but here I just want to go through the ideas behind how you structure the essay. So when I want to talk about fall in demand, how is it likely or how is it possible to bring about a fall in demand here? So maybe they can explore alternatives, maybe look for substitutes, such as your green energy, maybe anything, or even converting cars to electric fuel cars, natural gas fuel cars. So basically the idea is I look for substitutes to fuel, so that when there are more substitutes, right, and let's say the substitutes are more affordable, let's say the substitutes are around the same price range, you see that some consumers will actually switch over to use the substitutes instead, and hence they are less willing and able to purchase fuel at all price points, and then there will be a fall in demand. And because of this fall in demand, you realize, okay, look for substitutes, so there's a fall in demand, and then you briefly explain your price mag and talk about how it leads to lower prices and hence more affordable. And the limitation here is very clear cut, right? Because when it talks about the limitation, you need to realize that it is something that is very expensive to do. It is something that will take a long time to do, because the economy is largely powered by fuel right now, right? And how easy is it to convert the whole economy to change? Maybe not very, very easy, right? So when I talk about my evaluation over here, my in-body evaluation, I can tackle both these parts, right? Economic crisis right now makes it not very viable, because I won't have the ability, I won't have the funds, the resources to divert, to go and look for these alternatives. And because it takes a long time, right, You realize that it doesn't deal with the issue now. And that's the key, right? The prices of fuel are rising at this present moment. They're not rising in the future, they're not rising in the past, they are rising now. We need to deal with the problem now. Same thing when I look at my increase in supply argument. So my increase in supply argument, right? I'll draw the graph first. Same thing, I won't complicate the graph. I will just keep it as bare bones as I can. If there's my demand here, and then there's a increase in supply leads to a fall in price. Right? So here, right, when I look at this diagram, how I will explain an increase in supply. So to increase supply, right, they can either increase the technology used so that maybe they are able to produce more oil, and then they're more willing and able to produce oil, or they can diversify their imports from different people so that the country is able to import more oil so the supply can increase, right? So either ways, my endpoint is that supply increases from S0 to S1. And this will lead to a surplus at the initial price level. Then I explain my price mag leading to a fall in price overall. And then my limitation here is similar to the one in demand, right? Is that it's very expensive, or it takes a long time, especially when it comes to the one on improving technology, right? Technological advancements, technological breakthroughs are not something that happens overnight. You need time and kind of energy to do it. So the evaluation also very similar. I'll just write similar to DD argument. You realize that considering they're having an economic crisis, they're having blah blah blah, it is not very viable for them to work on the increase in supply or the decrease in demand measures at this present moment. So my overall synthesis, right, my evaluative conclusion for this is actually quite simple. In a sense, if I use my ATMS framework, the one that I'll go for straight away is time, right? Because you realize that when it comes to time horizon, right, I know that in the future, if I want to keep prices of fuel affordable, I have to do something about my demand or supply, right? But as of right now, to maintain the affordability of fuel in Sri Lanka, I have no choice but to use a PMAX. So when I want to argue whether or not price control is the most effective, I would say that in the short run, PMAX is absolutely necessary. To maintain the affordability, right? Because it directly pressures the price downward. It literally caps the prices. But in the long run, you realize that finding alternative energy forms resulting in a fall demand, or increasing supply through technological advancements, right, is pivotal to ensure that prices remain affordable. So when I use my long run, short run analysis, I would argue that in the short run, especially considering Sri Lanka, blah blah blah, how the country is, how it is reliant on so many things. In fact, I could even say that in the long run, right, a PMAX wouldn't work, because the longer you have a price ceiling, the longer there would be a possibility of a black market forming. So PMAX, I would say, is the best government policy in the short run to literally cap prices, but in the long run, we have to deal with the demand and supply side of things for the very simple reason, right? When I deal with this demand and supply side of things, I make my country's resources, I make my country, or rather here is Sri Lanka, I make Sri Lanka less vulnerable to external shocks. So here, I'm talking about the idea that I want to improve the affordability of fuel now, right? But in the long run, my strategy, the focus of the government should be to reduce the vulnerability of of my economy to such external shocks, so that if let's say there is another economic crisis, if let's say something else happens in the external economy that could affect the prices of maybe not even fuel, maybe other necessities, right? I have to be able to shield myself from it. I have to be able to protect my people from it. So these are the angles I would consider for evaluation, especially short run, long run. I'll give you a few minutes to copy down. I'll take a picture or whatever. But generally, that's all we have for this demand and supply question. I think part B is rather standard, but the one that we want to focus on here is more of part A because it's more of an interesting question. Okay? If not, that's all for this question, and I'll see you in another lecture. Bye bye.